people are fascinated with how differently they will feel. And JJ, one of the most recent studies I looked at acknowledged that the average American consumes a sugar sweetened beverage or some type of food 16 times a day. So when you think about,
What? Are
yes,
you kidding me?
no,
Seriously.
yeah. So
16 times a day.
yes. And so if you think about if you are spiking insulin 16 to 17 times a day, you are storing fat. There's no question. You are not burning anything. You are storing it. So pulling out the snacks and then just having 3 meals a day will go a long way in improving how you're able to kind of go from breakfast to lunch, lunch to dinner, dinner to breakfast. And then before you know it, you're going to be fasting because you're not eating anything from dinner until breakfast. And for a lot of people, that's 13 or 14 hours at a minimum. And then they get so confident because they realize, okay, I can do this. Like, this is manageable.
Hey, it's JJ, and welcome to Ask the Health Expert. But this isn't just any old Ask the Health Expert session. This is your bonus session. Yes, it's the weekend, and because it's the weekend, we are going to take some time with an amazing expert. So be on the lookout for these Saturday Ask the Health Expert bonus sessions where we're going to go deep into an amazing subject with an incredible expert to give you actionable items that you can put into your life. I am super excited to have Cynthia Thurlow back on the show. She is my go-to in intermittent fasting. She's a women's intermittent fasting expert. If you have not watched her TEDx talk, she's a 2-time TEDx speaker, but she has her second talk there on intermittent fasting. It's like, last time I checked, it's nearly at 8 million views, like crazy. She's the founder of Everyday Wellness Project, an amazing podcast you'll want to dial into. We're going to put all of this on the show notes too. Her TEDx talk, her podcast. She's a nurse practitioner, been one for over 20 years now. She's training others on how to do intermittent fasting. She's been all over the media as well. Gosh, ABC, Fox, KTLA, CW. She's been a medium and an entrepreneur. She was recently listed in Yahoo Finance as one of the 21 founders changing the way we do business. And her podcast, Everyday Wellness, was listed as 20 podcasts that will help you grow in 2020. And that was by Entrepreneur. And then by Business Insider, 21 podcasts to expand your mind in 2021. So I love this episode. What I realized as I was doing this episode with Cynthia is that we just kind of need to do probably one episode with Cynthia at least once a month because there's so much information. She really is the go-to expert here for women's intermittent fasting. She's also providing her sleep strategies book and talks a lot about fasting and sleep. This is usually $29. She's giving it to us. You can get that at jjvirgin.com/fast sleep. So make sure you grab that, and I'll be back in just a minute with Cynthia. I have been hard at work to create a new detox masterclass. Here it is. It is the 5 biggest diet mistakes that are keeping you from losing the weight and feeling great. And more importantly, how you can fix them fast. And this is your personal invitation from me to you to come for free on May 6th. And you can do that by going to jjvirgin.com/detox to claim your seat. Again, it's the 5 biggest diet mistakes that are keeping you from losing the weight and feeling great and how to fix them fast. I'll see you on May 6th. Well, welcome back, Cynthia Thurlow. It's so awesome to have you with me.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, you are a crowd-pleasing favorite, and being a women's intermittent fasting expert, like talk about, you've got the subject that everybody wants to know more about. So I'm excited to dive deep into it. And when you look at becoming this expert in intermittent fasting for women, what's the difference? What's the difference between men and women in fasting?
It's a great question, and one that I'm asked frequently. I think it really comes down to women are much more sensitive to the deprivation of macronutrients. And that ties in with our hormones and the fact that through most of our lives, we're able to conceive and carry a child. So our bodies, our brains are much more sensitive to the foods that we eat and how well we manage stress and sleep and, how we kind of navigate the world. I always say, men kind of blissfully, barrel through life, and women kind of have to take in a lot of what goes on around us and adjust and make accommodations and modifications based on where we are. Obviously, women that are still cycling, women that are still able to conceive, have to be a little bit more savvy with intermittent fasting versus, women when we go through menopause. I mean, we're more akin to men. It's reverse puberty. We have less circulating and fluctuating hormone levels in our bodies. So I sometimes find that menopausal women have the easiest time with integrating intermittent fasting into their lives versus cycling women.
So I love reverse puberty. I've never heard that before.
Well, I love thinking about it because I have teenage boys. And so their hormones are ramping up and mine are kind of ramping down in a different direction. But yeah, if you think about it that way, it really explains that, for the first 60% of our lives, we are able, well, maybe not 60%, but from the time we start getting a period until we stop getting a period, that's a chunk of time in our lives. And then the second half of our lives really begins. And statistically, that's about 40% of our lifetime. So it's a significant part of our lives when we are no longer able to conceive a child, but we have the flexibility to not be tied down to having a menstrual cycle. And for so many of us that kind of suffer through the moodiness of premenstrual syndrome and PMDD and all those other things that we deal with when we're younger.
And just the pain in the butt factor of all of it.
Totally.
You know?
I was just telling someone the other day, I said, I remember being on a really amazing vacation with my husband, and I'm in an African country. And I think to myself, okay, my period came early. I'm in this bathroom at the airport. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. But yeah, the inconvenience factor of getting caught without expecting and being prepared for things like that could be a source of frustration for sure.
Yeah, understatement. So before we dive into the how-tos, maybe we should talk about the why-tos. Like, what are the big benefits of intermittent fasting? Why would someone want to do this?
Well, I think it really goes back to how much our lifestyles have mitigated a lot of our health problems that we're seeing today. And our bodies are really designed to eat less frequently and not snack. And that's completely contrary to the dogma that we all grew up with, that breakfast was the most important meal of the day and we needed to eat mini meals and, snacking and eating all the time. And so, one of the main benefits of intermittent fasting is that you are able to tap into fat stores for energy. And that's a superior fuel source for energy. Our brains love ketones, which are these bodies that are produced when our bodies break down fatty acids. And so, ketones can be absorbed directly across the blood-brain barrier. And our mitochondria, these powerhouses of our cells, love the utilization of fats for fuel. So that's number one. And really, that's the way we're designed to live. Our bodies are designed to be fueled and fat adapted, and being able to be metabolically flexible to use carbohydrates and fats for fuel. So that's number one. We recognize that, especially with escalating rates of obesity, diabetes, we get lowered fasting insulin levels. And so that can lower our risk for developing neurodegenerative disorders, things like type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, lessens our likelihood of, going on to develop, frank diabetes if we're insulin resistant. And again, the lowered insulin levels provide, more, cognitive abilities. We're clearer mentally, and that's a huge benefit. I just think about, in terms of when people are really thinking about the things that make their lives easier, thinking less about food. You're able to power through your morning without having to worry about eating breakfast or stopping to have snacks because your blood sugar is not nearly as stable. And most of us are really carbohydrate adapted. So we burn through a quick source of energy. We're frequently hangry. We struggle to lose weight. And so that ties into that fat adaptation again. I also think about the fact that when we're not eating, we tap into a biological process called autophagy. And it's this waste and recycling process in the body. And so we get rid of diseased and disordered cells. And when we eat food, that process stops. So I remind people that it's important to get rid of diseased and disordered cells, whether they're cells that will go on to develop cancer or they're just wonky. The older that we get, the mitochondria in the powerhouses of our cells, they can get, dented and diseased, kind of like a tin can. And I like to remind people that it's a way and a means that our body can be more aligned with that. The healthiest cells will survive and go on to live. We get rid of the junk in the recycling process. And for many, many people, by being fat adapted, by keeping their insulin levels low, suddenly their menstrual cycles are more regular. If they have polycystic ovarian syndrome, for example, oftentimes they start to have a weight loss is the side effect of intermittent fasting. They can get better balance between their sex hormones. For many people, fasting can, better align a lot of their, adrenal and thyroid issues that they can be mitigating. So, those are kind of the big ones. I also like to tie in the fact that many people will actually start to sleep better because their blood sugar is better balanced. They're not waking up. They're not having these fluctuations, these emergency backup system in the body. When our blood sugar goes too low, there are mechanisms in place like spiking cortisol. So for many, many people, they're surprised when they start fasting and they've got, better balancing of their macros. All of a sudden their sleep gets better. And that's a huge pain point, as I know, with women as they kind of sail into perimenopause, that all of a sudden they've got all these sleep issues and that could be problematic. So those are some of the top things. Of course, there's lots of them, but those are usually the ones I try to discuss the most. I always say that people come to intermittent fasting out of curiosity of losing weight, and then they stay for all the other benefits.
Yes. And that we're going to dig a little bit more into sleep. But before then, so someone's hearing all these things. And hopefully, if you've been listening to this podcast, you have stopped snacking. Like that is, hopefully, but this might be your first podcast and maybe you still are snacking. That whole thing where people think that they have to eat small meals throughout the day to keep their blood sugar level. I'm like, no, you're just keeping it up. So someone right now is kind of eating the typical standard American diet of like breakfast, a snack, lunch, a snack, dinner, and then maybe even a snack before bed. I can't figure out why. How would they move from that to being able to successfully intermittent fast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I generally recommend that people remove the snacks first. So that's step one, remove the snacks. And then really structuring your meals so that you're focused on protein and healthy fats predominantly, and making those switches, adjusting those macronutrients, the two macronutrients that we know are most satiating. But remove snacks first, then proceed with adjusting your macros. And those two things alone, I think people are fascinated with how differently they will feel. And JJ, one of the most recent studies I looked at acknowledged that the average American consumes a sugar sweetened beverage or some type of food 16 times a day. So when you think about
what?
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Seriously.
Yeah. So
16 times a day.
And so if you think about if you are spiking insulin 16 to 17 times a day, you are storing fat. There's no question. You are not burning anything. You are storing it. So pulling out the snacks and then just having 3 meals a day will go a long way in improving, how you're able to kind of go from breakfast to lunch, lunch to dinner, dinner to breakfast. And then before you know it, you're going to be fasting because you're not eating anything from dinner until breakfast. And for a lot of people, that's 13 or 14 hours at a minimum. And then they get so confident because they realize, okay, I can do this. Like this is manageable. And so that's generally a good starting point.
That makes a ton of sense. I'm still kind of floored by the 16 times.
It's unreal.
Yeah. Wow. Yikes. I wonder how much of that people don't even realize they're doing.
I think it's the liquid calories. I think for so many people, they don't register the liquid calories because I have conversations with my kids about this all the time that, not so much my kids, but I know like the average teenager and they're out of the house, maybe not during COVID, but, during other times during the year or during other years for that matter. And, they're having a couple soft drinks, they have a couple fatty coffees, they have all these things that cumulatively over time, they just don't register 200 or 300 calories here and there. And, 40 to 60 grams of sugar can really derail a diet pretty fast.
Gosh, you wonder what Starbucks alone has done. Like it used to blow my mind back in the days when everyone hung out at Starbucks, but I would go in there and see these high school kids or even younger. You'd look at kids and I go, you're getting your 10-year-old like a caramel macchiato, like what, or a frappuccino. I'm like, oh my gosh, a caffeine sugar hit. You just wondered that alone, like how much people just added in with these coffee drinks.
I just don't think they realize. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you decide to add fat to your coffee, that's very different than someone adding, a bunch of syrup and a bunch of like whipped cream and sugary stuff. I truly think that it just doesn't register. I know, the last time I was in the airport with my kids, and, my kids actually like coffee. They got used to having coffee every once in a while because they were swimmers. And so they were up very early in the morning for practice. And so they knew that the way that they could, be incentivized, I'm like, you can have a cafe mocha, you can have a cappuccino. I'm like, I worry less about the milk than I worry about the sugary stuff. And they knew that I was like, don't even ask for frappuccino. I'm like, I don't even know how many grams of sugar is in that. That is like a jolt of poison. I'm like, no, thank you. I'm like, coffee you can have. I will accept that. But the other stuff, no way.
Wow. Yeah. Well, since we're into sugar, let's move over to sleep. Woof.
So I know this is kind of the witching hour in my house. My dogs like to sit on patrol. So.
Hey, this is reality in life. I'm just waiting. I remember we were doing a podcast and I didn't have a headphone in, so you could hear the dogs. So of course, someone's dog's barking. So then Daisy had to chime in, and then it's like a barky party. So,
and I am completely by myself in my house. So usually, what I do is I'll like throw a pen to distract them. The dog that's barking downstairs is too far away. I'm sorry, you had asked me a question when my dog
and then the dogs went wild.
Yes.
I asked, so you said a little bit about this, and I think this is such a good one to bring up because, one of the biggest things that you hear about sleep is waking up at 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about how does fasting help or hurt sleep? How does sleep help or hurt fasting? Like, how do they work together?
Well, I usually look at it this way. If someone is already sleeping through the night and they add fasting and they stop sleeping through the night, okay, then I know it's probably the fasting that might be driving that. And the question is always, did you get your macros in? Do we need to change your macros in your last meal? Do we need to add some fats right before you go to bed? So just kind of thinking through things. So that's one separate issue. But I see a lot of middle-aged women, perimenopause, menopause, that have had crappy sleep for years and years and years. And then they start gaining weight. And then they're like, I want intermittent fasting to be the thing that's going to fix this for me. And so I remind everyone that sleep is foundational to our health. Ultimately, we have to find out why we're not sleeping and address that before we start adding in intermittent fasting, because our body perceives that as a stress. Stress is all about the benefits of stress. A little bit of stress is good, too much is not a good thing. And so whether it's, cold exposure, infrared sauna, high intensity interval training, fasting, all of these things are hormetic stressors. So beneficial stressors in the right amount for the right person. So the first thing I think about when someone tells me I'm not sleeping through the night is, okay, we have to have sleep hygiene, much like when our kids are toddlers and little people, and we have to kind of get them, they had a bath and they got lavender rubbed on their feet and they've got a book read and they knew these are the things we do when it's getting ready for bed. And the same thing for women. And so, getting off of electronics, wearing blue blockers, making sure your room is cold and dark. And for everyone that's listening, my family knows that the air conditioning or heat is at 65 degrees or lower year round when I go to bed. And that's how I sleep really well. And so I always say everyone else bundles up and they just have accepted this is the way things are in my house. Because if I don't sleep well, I'm not a happy person. So making sure the room is cold and dark and ensuring that you've got some type of a ritual, like getting off electronics is a legit issue. The blue light that we get from electronics, whether it's our phone, our tablet, our computer, etc., the TV, will dysregulate the secretion of a hormone called melatonin. And if melatonin is suppressed, cortisol is up, and cortisol is going to tell our bodies it's time to party. So really being diligent about that. For a lot of people, there are specific adaptogenic herbs that I will recommend, things that are very calming to the central nervous system, like rhodiola or even relora, which is derived from magnolia bark, but really lovely. Maybe someone has some chamomile non-caffeinated tea before bed. Maybe they soak in magnesium or take magnesium supplements. And so sometimes those things alone can make a huge impact on sleep quality. And if that doesn't work, maybe that improves things, but people are still waking up, then we really have to dive into what are their macros like. Some people don't, frankly, eat enough food and their bodies wake up because their blood sugar drops. Or, they've depleted their glycogen stores, their stored sugar because they're working out way too intensely, too much. The mindset for so long has been eat less, exercise more. And a lot of women take that to an extreme. They really restrict their calories. They really over-exercise. Their adrenals get stressed out, and it's not a super sexy topic to talk about our adrenal glands. But as we kind of transition into middle age, our ovaries are producing less progesterone, and that, causes us to lean more on the adrenals. So if you're not managing your stress, and managing stress may look different for every one of us, but that means meditation and gratitude journaling, getting out in nature and exercising the right way. I'm sure, JJ, you talk a lot about this, but gone are the days of doing intense CrossFit 5 days a week. I mean, you can't do that. Your body will not be happy. And you may not get enough recovery to be able to, uh, allow your adrenal glands to really not be so stressed out. So managing stress is another really critical, important thing. I myself am a big fan of box breathing. When I'm in bed at night, if I wake up in the middle of the night, which thankfully doesn't happen very often, I will kind of get in this meditative box breathing, which will tap me back into my parasympathetic rest and repose side of my body.
Walk us through box breathing. You're the second person that's mentioned it. And just for anyone listening, walk us through what box breathing is.
Okay. So this is like super, super simple. You inhale for 4 seconds. You hold your breath for 4 seconds. You exhale for 4 seconds. And that will stimulate the vagus nerve, which is one of your cranial nerves. And that will kind of get you out of this fight or flight, where you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, and kind of get you into this rest and repose side. And I can almost guarantee everyone, if you do that for 4 or 5 sets, you will be much more calm. It's my trick when I get ready to talk on stage. It's my way of like controlling my, my, not anxiety, but just that feeling like I get excited when I'm going to speak on stage. And so that's one of the ways I will also, if I wake up in the middle of the night and my mind's kind of racing and I'm thinking about all the things, it's like box breathing will get me out of that and I will fall back to sleep. So macros, stress management, a lot of people love melatonin. I don't love melatonin. And here's the thing. I've come to realize that most melatonin supplements really overshoot what our body can make intrinsically. So, you're trying to shoot a mouse with like an elephant gun. So instead of, intrinsically our bodies make way less than 1 milligram melatonin is secreted during the day or in the evening. And we're giving ourselves 3, 5, 10 milligrams. And people will say, well, I still wake up. And I'm like, that's right. You're overcompensating for a problem, and that may not even be what you need. So, really tiptoeing into this. Now, beyond that, I always say it's like peeling the onion. Sometimes people don't sleep because they have mold exposures in their house. I had one woman who is absolutely lovely, but had mold exposure in her house, hadn't slept for years and years and years. And it wasn't until she got her house tested for mold. So there are a lot of things that can mitigate. Obviously, that's more the minority, but you kind of start slowly and work forward. One of the things I also really like is a product called Calm Down, but it's an amino acid. It's GABA. So for a lot of people, that can be part of that nice kind of evening ritual of things that they do for themselves. But really digging deep and acknowledging that the sleep piece, you got to get that on board before you start adding in cumulatively more stressors. But that's the usual kind of direction that I go with sleep.
You're supposed to get a good night's sleep, but it's just not happening. Maybe you struggle to fall asleep, or you just can't seem to stay asleep. I get it. I struggled too, which is why I created Sleep Candy, my delicious, chewable sleep supplement that's a powerful combination of L-theanine, melatonin, 5-HTP, inositol, and B6. And good news, because you're a listener, you get 10% off your order at jjvirgin.com/sleep candy while supplies last. Just enter the code SLEEP, all in caps, at checkout. All right. So we've got the start out of all the benefits and that women need to approach this differently than men. We're going to get a little bit more into the hormones, but you talk about clean fasting because I think there's a lot of stuff out there, especially when we get into more keto of just like this. I'm like, whoa, what is all of this pork rind butter bacon diet going like? So when you look at when you recommend these macros and focusing on protein and fat, what are typical meal recommendations for you when you think of clean fasting?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of animal-based protein. So whether it's like a fatty fish like tuna or salmon, I'm a huge fan of beef and pork and bison. I'm a huge bison advocate because it's like such a nice, clean protein. Chicken or poultry are really great options. And then I will always be thinking strategically about a healthy fat. For me, it could be butter on some broccoli. It could be extra virgin olive oil on my salad, or it could be some nuts that are tossed over a salad, but always very strategic. And if I kind of build my meals with animal protein, anywhere from 4 to 6 ounces, depending on what it is. I find things like salmon in particular are very satiating. So I don't need 6 ounces of salmon. I'm not sure I could finish all that. But 4 ounces of salmon or like 6 ounces of steak, I do really well with. Adding in some non-starchy vegetables and then creatively thinking about fat sources. And the one thing that I think is really important and why people get keto wrong is it doesn't mean that you eat all the bacon in the world and all the cheese and all the nuts. Fats are more calorically dense. And although I'm not a calorie counter, I am a macro advocate. And I remind people that the density of fat macros are much more than protein or carbohydrates. So just being smart that if you have a cup of broccoli, which would be great with a tablespoon of butter, and then you've got 6 ounces of a steak. I mean, that is a normal kind of plated meal. And that should be very satiating between the protein and the healthy fats and, some salt. I'm always an advocate of adding, high quality salt to my meals, but that should be very satiating. You should be able to finish that meal and walk away and not feel like your kitchen is beckoning to you versus we're a very carbohydrate focused culture. If you have a big plate of pasta and you have a skimpy amount of protein on there and you load it up with cheese, I can guarantee your appetite, you're not going to be satiated. You're going to keep going back, keep wanting more. And you're going to, your macros are going to head and shift in a different direction. And one thing that's really important, and it's an uber not so sexy topic, is that the older we become as women, the more we have to be mindful of our portions of carbohydrates. And I know that triggers some women in very bad ways. And obviously we're all individuals, but that means that you have to really shift your focus to protein and healthy fats. And I know you're a big advocate of fiber as well, and shifting away from, lots of pasta, lots of rice, lots of grains, lots of gluten, because that is not satiating. That is going to dysregulate your blood sugar and you just can't get away with it. And that's the unfortunate effects of being middle-aged and beyond, is that you have to be more mindful of those things.
I don't think it's just middle-aged anymore if you look around. And, it's funny. I had one of my sons, we've never had things like cereal in the house. Of course, they go to grandma's house. And I'm like, great, Mom, you just wrecked them, And one of my kids said, gosh, Mom, I eat cereal and get hungry. I'm like, well, there you go. Yeah, my whole thing is protein, fat, and fiber.
Yep.
And fiber from loads of non-starchy vegetables and small amounts of low carbs, and just really looking at it that way. And I think pretty much any of us can see you start to load up on those carbs and you're like, it's quick. It's amazing how quickly it shifts. It's like, wow, what happened? Right. And you just don't feel good.
No. And it's interesting for me. So for full transparency with everyone, last fall, my thyroid medicine got recalled, and I went on the journey of not being the provider, being the patient, and being really stuck in what I considered, it was like this turmoil of, I was put on compounded medication, then another medication. Nothing was agreeing with me. I was gaining weight. I was becoming insulin resistant. I'm a tiny person. I was tracking everything. I was on a scale. I was on Lumen. I had a continuous glucose monitor. I was tracking everything. And I felt like a wackadoodle. But it was really valuable for me to go through that experience because it just goes to show us when our hormones are not properly balanced, no one's happy. And I was not happy watching all of this kind of go on. So for people that are listening and saying, something seems like it's off, what I used to do is no longer working, it's all hormones. I think it's Sarah Gottfried. I was reading a statistic that she had in an article that I was looking at, and it was like 95% of weight issues are related to hormones being imbalanced.
It's so important. It makes me so, I got to tell you, when I first started saying your body's not a bank account, it's a chemistry lab, it was like I was saying the earth was flat. But I could just see it. I didn't know at the time. I just was like, wow, my women who are 45 plus are totally different than men and women in their 30s. Like, what the heck's going on? And they can be eating exactly the same things. And I think that's what's important is you could be eating exactly the same stuff and all of a sudden your hormones shift and bam.
Yep.
And so then you get a little crazy and you go, I know what I'll do. I'll restrict more and I'll exercise more, even though that's not the right thing to do. And it makes it worse, not better. So that's why this is so key important to understand is that if your hormones are in imbalance and you are trying to do all this stuff and massively restrict and overwork, it's just going to make you worse. So kind of final wrap up on how hormones really contribute here, because I just think that we can never hear that enough, because no matter how many times you hear it, when you're struggling with your weight, I think the first thing people look at is like, oh, I'll just eat less, exercise more, even though you can pretty much see quickly how much, that can just make things worse, not better.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, this is something you and I have talked about quite a bit is, trusting your body and what it's trying to tell you and finding a healthcare provider that is sensitive to what you're experiencing and can validate what you're experiencing. Because I know for myself, when I got transitioned to a compounded thyroid medication, I'm a tiny person, but when something is not agreeing with your body, I suddenly became hyperthyroid and really didn't feel good. And someone said to me, oh, well, that's actually one of the hardest hormones to compound. And I was like, I'm a healthcare provider and I didn't know that. And so for everyone that's listening, acknowledging that sometimes you have to balance these basic hormones before you can move on to other things. And blood sugar is a good one, cortisol, melatonin, our thyroid hormone, sex hormones, all of those things really mitigate how we perceive the world and how we sleep and how much energy we have. And, all these very simple things that we take for granted until they don't work right.
And then, boy,
very humbling.
However, this is where it's, if you're listening to that going, oh my gosh, the cool news is you will figure it out. It's why you keep food journals and you use a scale. And I think if we can move from using a scale as a judgmental, mean tool to a tool that's just telling us if things are working or not, take the emotion and all that stuff out of it and just do that stuff and start to really track, because we are ultimately our best healthcare provider, because we're the ones that really understand if it's working or not. So that is an important piece of it. So parting words for someone considering, because I know one of the things you're going to be gifting everybody is and this was really cool of you, you're giving everybody your sleep ebook. And I'm going to put that at jjvirgin.com/fast sleep. And that's a $29 ebook. So Cynthia is gifting that to everybody. So you'll want to make sure you grab that. Parting words to someone thinking about doing this, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say, this is intrinsically the way our bodies are designed to work best. I think there's a lot of fear about not eating more frequently. People worry that, I'm going to mess up my metabolism. I can't work out fasted. I'm not going to be able to have energy to get through my day. And
I'm going to lose muscle.
Exactly. And so I remind people, you spike human growth hormone while you're fasted. So that helps you maintain lean muscle. But one of the really important things is slow and steady wins. No one's in a race. Really critically important that if you're snacking, just remove the snacking. Restructure your macros so that you're in a position where you feel confident And even if you're doing a 12, 13, 14-hour fast, you're still doing benefits for your bodies. And, it's kind of slowly opening up that fasting window. There's so many ways to support your body while you're fasted. I know we didn't touch on that, but, knowing that you can hydrate, you don't have to do a fast dry, plain coffee with some, Himalayan sea salt is one way you can take away the bitterness. Bitter tea, so like green and black teas, those you can consume while fasted. They're not going to break your fast. And I'm a clean fast advocate, so I always have to kind of plug that in there. But hopefully the sleep book will be beneficial. I love JJ's listeners, and hopefully this information will be really helpful to get your sleep habits on track.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I super appreciate it. Again, jjvirgin.com/fast sleep. You will be back.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like this could be like a part 1 of part 10. So we'll bring you back to continue the series. And I just super appreciate you hanging out with us and sharing so much good stuff.
Awesome. Such a pleasure.
All right. All right. I hope you loved that as much as I did. And make sure that you subscribe to jj.com. It's that easy. Just go to subscribe to jj.com so you don't miss these awesome deep dive bonus episodes. I've got my weekly, everyday, daily Ask the Health Expert, and then I'm going deep with experts on the topics that you want to know more about. Of course, intermittent fasting is always one we get asked about a ton. And one more time, Cynthia's download of her Sleep Strategies $29 book is free for you being an audience member, jjvirgin.com/fast sleep. All right. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and I'll see you next time.